So, George R. R. Martin recently made a couple of updates on his website under his Not a Blog tab. I mean, it was rather depressing, and for some, I'm sure it may have come across as frustrating for you as well. But what is far more repulsive than whatever displeasure anyone may have gotten from George's update is the response that he gets every single time he speaks or does anything that does not serve the completion of Winds of Winter. It's always the same loud voices that are probably in the minority, but because they throw out the wildest statements or publish the harshest of criticisms, those voices are amplified. We're all familiar with how this works. But maybe some of you read George's update and you feel that he's being provocative and the ruthless nature that of which he's being criticized is fair game. Criticism is one thing, but I do suggest, whenever you get a chance, go look at the comment sections of some of these YouTube videos, and if you want to use that as a reference to see where there's maybe a difference between criticism and hatred, or sometimes even just threats. Here's the paragraph from George's blog that really triggered some people. Meanwhile, the U.S. grows more polarized every day. Hate is rising. Democracy is under threat. Millions of Americans have swallowed the lie that the 2020 election was stolen. Newspeak has taken over political discourse. Cancel culture is destroying lives and careers. And we have a disgraced, indicted, venomous ex-president winning primaries despite openly declaring that he will be a dictator on day one and will govern on a platform of retribution when he is not busy grabbing women. I'm not going to say this. His last attempt to overthrow the government failed on January 6th, but some of his more ardent supporters are now saying that next time they will bring more guns. There are actually folks out there wanting civil war. Don't worry, I'm not here to tell you how you feel or how to feel about this, and this channel will never serve to discuss election fraud or Donald Trump trying to usurp the Iron Throne or whichever political party will destroy the United States first. I don't discuss that stuff here, but if you read this and felt that George R. R. Martin was blaming conservatives and Donald Trump for delaying his progress on Winds of Winter, then I do question whether you're sharing your opinion in good faith, if you're not capable of reading comprehension, or maybe you're just probably doing what you always do, which is rage bait your viewers and readers for clicks kind of like these folks. I think George R. R. Martin has fairly called out these types of fans with the term anti-fans, and hear what George actually says of this subject. Well, I take solace where I can, in chocolate thrones, if nowhere else, in books and films and television shows. Though even there, toxicity is growing. It used to be fun talking about our favorite books and films and having spirited debates with fans who saw things different. But somehow, in this age of social media, it is no longer enough to say I did not like book X or film Y, and here's why. Now, social media is ruled by anti-fans who would rather talk about the stuff they hate than the stuff they love, and delight in dancing on the graves of anyone whose film has flopped. What is the most peculiar thing is that any time these anti-fans get called out for their lunacy or what I categorize as irrational arguments to justify their niche in the YouTube hemisphere or other media outlets, they typically respond in a manner only to confirm that what they're being criticized for is 100% valid, because instead of reading the blog and taking it at face value, they deliberately mischaracterize this blog so that they can interpret it as George blaming everyone but himself for not finishing Winds of Winter. I do agree with George, there are channels on this platform dedicated to only discussing what they hate. Which, that's fine, but if you want the freedom to condemn anything that doesn't reflect the entertainment that you want, and you want to criticize it so publicly, then being criticized for that is kinda what you have to be willing to accept in return. And then you go back and forth defending your criticism, and that's fine. But suggesting George is blaming you or Donald Trump or anyone else for not finishing this book, that's dishonest, and you know it is. Most of the videos that I watch don't even reference the blog directly. Instead, they chose to reference a third-party article that includes a biased editorial to better frame their conclusions. I'm not sure how you found this video, but if you came across it in a search, I'm sure you were tempted by various other quotes or videos or articles mocking George R. R. Martin by quoting him or even misquoting him, suggesting that George R. R. Martin is blaming you, maybe even Israel and Donald Trump for the Winds of Winter not coming out. I'm not sure. I recommend you read the blog. That way you can formulate your own opinion, because that's not really what he's saying at all. What is interesting about these responses, none of them address what could also be impacting George mentally and emotionally. And death is everywhere. Howard Waldrop was the latest, and his passing has hit me very, very hard. But before him, we lost Michael Bishop, Terry Bisson, David Drake, from my wildcards team: Victor Milan, John Jose, Miller, Edward Bryant, Steve Perrin. I still miss Gardner Dezoy and Phyllis Eisenstein, and my amazing agent Kay McCauley. Lynn Wayne is gone, Fonda McIntyre, and Harlan Ellison. Greg Bear too, and oh, I could go on. I look around and it seems as though my entire generation of science fiction and fantasy writers is gone or going. Only a handful of us remain, and for how long, I wonder. I know I have forgotten people in the list above, and maybe that is the destiny that awaits all of us, to be forgotten. For that matter, the entire human race may be forgotten. If climate change does not get us, war will. Too many countries have nukes. I do want to point out that first line where George states, "Death is everywhere." Of course it is, but this is where George seems to indulge in some hyperbole when he says everywhere. People typically communicate in a hyperbolic framing when they're feeling emotional about something. George goes on to list a handful of people he knows that have passed away, and if you have any experience with grief, I'm sure you know how strange it can be and the impact mentally can turn your world upside down. Many people can relate to this, and if you're not sympathetic, you probably can still empathize with someone experiencing loss. The many videos and articles condemning George's latest posts took the time to translate his words as him blaming so many external factors, but they chose to leave this part out on purpose. I'm not going to tell you why they don't include it, but you can form your own opinion. Now, I will say one area I do agree with a lot of these critics. When I read this blog, I did think to myself, it does not sound like George in any way suggesting he's making progress on Winds of Winter. I came to that conclusion in a different way than these unreasonable interpreters. The part of the article that tells me there's no progress on Winds of Winter, you might ask? At no point in this blog does George ever even reference Winds of Winter. And maybe you think that's strange if he's assigning all this blame for not completing Winds of Winter to these anti-fans and Donald Trump or Nerdrotic, but it's not strange, because he's not blaming them. Unfortunately, if you follow George's blog long enough, the biggest criticism about his updates that me and many others have is these updates usually have nothing to do with Winds of Winter. And this particular blog was no different.